Welcome back to episode 3 of Home Darkroom Printing. Today I'll be printing some medium format negatives. They are all square format shot with my Hasselblad, and I'll be enlarging them to 8 by 8 inches. Like always, I'm giving away 3 of these prints to folks who subscribe and leave a comment below. In this episode, I'm also going to show you how I made some frames from scratch using Purple Heart wood to match the desk I made in my last video. I love seeing my images printed. It's hard to see them on Instagram, on a phone screen, knowing what they can look like as darkroom prints held in my hands. I especially like to print my work big, like 20 by 20 inches big, and I think it works so well for the kind of images I like to make. These big prints take a lot of time and resources. The paper alone is nearly $20 a sheet, so I sell them for much higher prices, and they are all serialized and limited to editions of 30. Not everyone has the space or is willing to pay that much, and I get that. But it's still a huge goal of mine to share more of my printed work. So I'm trying out including these smaller 8 by 8 inch print options, which are much cheaper and easier for me to make, but are still high quality handmade darkroom prints. I can just offer them for much less. I think they become really accessible at $20 each, and they can more easily be worked into a gallery wall style. Plus, you never know, maybe after getting a few of these smaller ones, you might want one of the big ones. This first one is one of my favorite photos. It's from December 2021 on a trip to Guatemala with my dad. We hiked up Acatenango Volcano, which is technically active but safe to hike, and it's a few miles from Fuego Volcano, which is very active and erupts every 10 to 30 minutes. We camped out just below the summit, so the whole afternoon and into the evening we just sat and watched this volcano erupting in the distance. This was one of the larger eruptions we saw that day, and I love the clouds in the foreground perfectly framing the volcano. It was shot on Berger Pancro 400 film with my Hasselblad and 180mm lens. This second image is from a few minutes later with a slightly different composition and from slightly later in the eruption cycle. I don't print this one enough though, because I always print that first one, but this one is also really cool. This is a ranunculus flower. In order to expose the print long enough to get the background completely black, I had to dodge the flower a little bit so that I could retain some of the brightness in the petals. I love it because the dark tips of the petals combined with the subtle depth of field fall off really helped this one feel three-dimensional to me, especially floating in the black space. This is a dahlia flower from Five Fork Farms up in Boston. I used to get their flower CSAs, and the dahlia season was always my favorite. It looks almost like fire to me, and I especially love the depth created by the light and shadow. This is one that I love so much I have a big 20 by 20 inch print of it. I printed 2 versions of this one at half a second longer than the other because the first one looked a little bit light to me, but once I toned them in selenium and dried them, I preferred the slightly lighter one. In my little darkroom, I just felt like I couldn't see enough of the detail that I know exists in the highlights in the lighter one, but I made a note for next time. This one is from my favorite place in Washington, D.C., the Botanic Gardens. It's not easy for me to compose plants in a middle distance, Flowers close up are easy, landscapes in the distance are easy. The middle distance is always something I've found tricky, but I think on this occasion I nailed it. I like that the leaf is cropped by the square frame, and the second leaf in the background is slightly out of focus but still recognizable as the same kind of leaf. It creates kind of a pleasant repeating effect that I think works really well, especially with the texture of the palm frond. This is a daisy that I grew in my kitchen a few years back, and I really like the flecks of pollen that you can see on the petals in the foreground. With the times that I needed to get detail in the petals, I wasn't happy with how much I was losing in the center of the flower, so I used a little spoon to dodge the center. This one will actually be for sale in person at the Phoenix Film Revival Festival in Arizona next week on November 9th, along with the Dahlia and Volcano prints that I showed earlier in the video, so check it out if you're in that area. This is of some beach plum flowers in my grandfather's garden. The whole bush was lit up with these short white flowers in a magnificent plume, but I like this closer view where you can see some great detail in the individual flowers. This is one of the ones that I chose to put in the frames that I made with the help of my grandfather, so I'm actually planning to give this one to him over the holidays. These last three are from Peru, where I did the Y-Wash circuit in 2022, which was over 80 miles in the Andes, all above 13,000 feet. I actually made my first YouTube video about that experience, so if you're interested, I'll leave the link in the description so you can check that out and see more of the photos I made. This first one was on day 2, and it was a pitch clear day with not a cloud in the sky. We had just hiked through our first pass and had come out to some gentle rollers when we had stopped for a quick rest, and I turned to see this scene behind me. The moon was still setting, and the muleteers carrying our camping and food stuff were lined up just perfectly. I quickly added a red filter to bring some contrast in the sky and knelt down to take this one without a tripod. I didn't take any video of printing these last two, but they are both on Kodak Tri-X, and from 2 of the days of that trip that we actually did have some clouds to add some texture to the sky. All of these prints are toned in 1:9 dilution of selenium toner for 3 minutes, which doesn't have a huge effect on the image tone, but it adds a little bit of depth, and more importantly, it increases the archivability of these prints, meaning that if you keep them well, they will outlast any of us by a good while. Going back to the frame making, I decided that I wanted to make a little gallery wall for myself with frames matching the top of the desk that I just made in that beautiful dark purple. I knew I was going to my grandparents for the weekend recently, and my grandfather has a whole workshop with tons of power tools, and so I figured I would take some wood up there and make the cuts that I needed and then assemble the frames at home. I brought 4 boards that were 36 inches long, 2 inches wide and 3/4 inch thick. I planned to get 6 frames out of them by cutting them in half lengthwise and then into thirds. I have used power tools before, but I'm very far from an expert, and Purple Heart is not the easiest wood to work with. Plus, these boards are thin and narrow, and the table saw was big and loud. Ultimately, I ended up with 4 frames, but I got to spend some quality time with my grandfather, and now I think I could do the next 6 perfectly and much more quickly. I assembled them at home, and I used this neat clamp that I got on Amazon for a few bucks, which ended up working perfectly to clamp any kind of rectangle. I glued the corners, but it is end grain to end grain, so I used some little staples to reinforce them as well. I got some glass and mats cut to size from my local framing shop, and then I used some acid-free linen tape to secure the prints to the mat. I like the float look for my darkroom prints without any top mat because I want to show the full border of the negative and bring attention to the print itself being part of the display. I think they came out so nicely, but I'd love to know what you think. As always, these and more prints are available on my website, and don't forget to leave a comment and subscribe to be eligible for the print giveaway. And find me on Instagram so that I can reach out to the winners and arrange for where I should send the prints.